Meeting to order. Rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Susie, roll call, please.
Councilmember Groves.
Here.
Councilmember Chambers.
Here.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Here.
Councilmember Yankovic.
Here.
And Mayor DeVore.
Here. Before we do the consent agenda, Representative Johnson's office called. She's going to be about a half hour late. They were in a budget meeting late. So we'll just leave that as a floating agenda item. And we'll let her come up when she gets here and speak for a legislative update if you guys are cool with that. Other than that, I have no changes. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Support.
Any other discussion? Sue?
Councilmember Groves.
Yes.
Mayor DeVore.
Yes.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Yes.
Councilmember Yankovic.
Yes.
Councilmember Chambers.
Yes. All right, public comment for non-agenda items.
I'm Ron Janowski. I live at 520 North Monroe Street. I am a Lowell small business merchant and a registered voter. I'm speaking in favor of 2-hour parking on Main Street in Lowell. Time-restricted parking is found in American towns literally coast to coast and border to border, and for good reason. Limiting the time that parking must turn over energizes a downtown business area, and that ensures a steady flow of visitors to small shops such as we have here in Lowell. Such flow is always critical to the success or failure of small businesses, but especially in these trying economic times. Making sure that parking spaces reopen regularly is more than just convenient when larger pieces like furniture are going from store to car. Time-restricted parking is proven. It's good for the public, good for business, it is good for Lowell. Lowell needs time-restricted parking. Lowell has long had 2-hour parking signs on Main Street. However, 2 weeks ago at the last meeting of the City Council, the issue of eliminating time-restricted parking appeared publicly for the very first time and was instantly approved unanimously by the Council in the blink of an eye. In the space of about 2 minutes, the subject to eliminate was suddenly raised by a council member, tacked on to a broader city parking ordinance, and was approved with modification. The online video shows that there was little discussion beyond the surprise shown by the city manager that the ending of 2-hour parking should appear out of the blue as it did and voted into law as it was. Its inclusion in the council proceedings was so subtle that it was not even noticed by most of the folks in the audience. For all the world now, in hindsight, it looks like 5 people acted unilaterally and without public comment or input to slip into law something of high interest and impact to the public, especially the small business community that put them in office. The trust that the public holds in its elected officials is like crystal, valued and beautiful when whole, but worthless once broken. Luckily, someone did hear of their action and spread the word among the concerned merchants who are here tonight to make their voices heard. But there are layers to this onion. From talks this week with the city manager and the city attorney, it is now known that the 2-hour parking restriction on Main Street in Lowell never legally existed as an ordinance. It follows then that the council's action 2 weeks ago officially eliminated something that didn't exist. To borrow a popular phrase, come on, man. This raises a raft of questions about the council and the no parking issue. Council made a kerfluffle of eliminating a non-existent ordinance, while the city quickly removed the 2-hour parking signs on Main Street, but kept 2-hour parking signs, restriction signs, up in the parking lot right outside this building. Is there 2-hour parking in Lowell, or isn't there? Is it enforceable, or as claimed by the chief of police, unenforceable? What is not in question, either tonight or into the future of Lowell, is the value and need for limited time parking restrictions on Main Street. This issue is pressing and already has broad support in Lowell's business community. I ask that the council tonight commit to having the time restricted parking on Main Street be an official agenda item on the next council meeting.
You want to let anyone else speak or no? I'd like to address the allegation.
Yeah, I think Susie has letters, right?
Yes, I have some others. Go
Right.
ahead. To whom it may concern, last week I was reading an online Lowell News article of the City Council meeting recap. I saw something unexpected. The 2-hour parking limit on Main Street is eliminated. My heart sank. The continuing growth and development of Main Street is great. I can remember when so many buildings were once dilapidated and boarded up. Seeing these buildings loved and full of people again has certainly improved our town and has brought many more visitors. However, no one can deny the parking has felt extra crowded lately. More buildings being in use again means more demand for parking. Buildings which once held storage or sat empty are now being used as apartments or adding dozens of new seats for customers looking to dine. These scenarios mean more cars in some areas than before. Every year there are new apartments and new restaurants and other businesses being opened on Main Street, but the street parking available remains the same. The 2-hour parking limit signs have always sent the message that parking is meant to turn over regularly in front of Main Street businesses. This has allowed spots to open up regularly enough that customers are able to find a spot to visit a favorite store or eatery without too much frustration. I understand that perhaps 2 hours isn't enough time for every customer if they wish to go out to eat and visit other stores. I would not be opposed to signs that allowed slightly longer parking, such as 3 to 4 hours. But without parking limit signs, I worry that parking will become more complicated. We have had a few cases where a trailer or several cars have sat in front of our shop for most of the day, yet wasn't the car of the customer visiting us. I have heard frustrations from other businesses experiencing the same thing. Shop owners have generally had an understanding that the spots out in front are meant to be left for customers, not a business owner, not employees, not tenants who need to park for most of the day, and not a car to be left behind for the day for ride-sharing purposes. Without parking limits on Main Street, cars may park in front of shops and restaurants all day, and customers will have a more difficult time finding a spot nearby their favorite stores. In our case, many of our customers are older in age or are mothers with young children. I worry that they will not easily be able to walk a block every time no convenient parking is available. Many of our customers walk out carrying birthday cakes, baked boxes of baked goods, bags full of boxed lunches, and several hot coffee drinks. Will these customers keep coming to see us knowing they'll have to walk considerably further than before while juggling their purchases? I worry that the answer will be no. Please consider creating a parking ordinance for downtown Lowell that protects parking spots for our downtown businesses to attract and retain our hard-earned customers. Please return the 2-hour parking limit signs or something similar to make it clear that these spots are meant to be left open and turn over regularly for customers to have convenient access to businesses next to these spots. Our small businesses are not viable without convenient parking. Thank you for reading. Respectfully, Patricia and Annalise DeLuey of Sweet Seasons. Honorable Mayor DeVore and City Council members, I am in favor of keeping a restricted amount of parking time on Main Street and in the city parking lots. Posting a time helps to eliminate all-day parking, and it gives individuals quick access to storefronts on Main Street. Posted signage provides visitors with clear direction on how long they have to park. I would like to see 3-hour parking posted. If you are a guest customer in our town here to shop and eat, it typically requires more than 2 hours to complete this mission. Perhaps the city parking lots closer to Main Street activity need to be labeled as 3-hour parking, which is currently 2-hour, as well as Main Street. This would still make overnight parking prohibited, which the council was trying to accomplish with the ordinance. As the downtown develops, we have more mixed use, parking will become the unknown. Anyone could assume parking on Main Street and in the city lots all day, even though there is an overnight restriction. For years, I thought we would go to a permit-type parking and have designated parking areas. The designated parking area should be for business owners, employees, residents, and building owners. I believe this would eliminate those that abuse parking in restricted spots and would also be easier to enforce. Lastly, I think the business owners, building owners, merchants, and residents should have been given time to openly discuss this ordinance before it was put into place. Everyone has great ideas, and to listen and use them might have prevented another hot button for the council to work through. Sincerely, Liz Baker.
We're gonna let Perry go
Yep.
before. He's fine?
Yeah, she's got more to read.
I have one more.
All right.
My name is Karen Wade. I am a registered voter and a small business owner in the city of Lowell. I am here to voice my concern and disappointment over the removal of 2-hour parking restrictions on Main Street from Hudson to Jefferson. 2-hour parking is needed in Lowell's downtown shopping district. The chief of police stated 2-hour parking limit is unenforceable, but I ask why. Is it because a recent court decision makes the chalking of tires illegal? That court challenge has been working its way through the legal system for several years. At alternating levels, the decision changes from it's legal to chalk to it's illegal to chalk. Currently, it's true, it's illegal to chalk tires, but that by itself does not make a 2-hour parking limit unenforceable. I know firsthand because I have worked with the Lowell Police Department over several years on parking issues in the 200 West block of Main Street. 2-hour parking, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. signs are clearly posted. When I notice a vehicle has been parked in the same spot for over 2 hours, I contact the police department and ask for an officer to be dispatched. If there is an available officer, they arrive, at which time I show them photos and give them their vehicle and license plate information. The officer makes note of the information, and then the official 2-hour clock begins. If 2 more hours pass and the vehicle is still parked in the same location, I call the police department again and ask for an officer. If one is available, one is dispatched, and then the vehicle might be ticketed. By the time the vehicle gets ticketed for exceeding the posted 2-hour parking limit, they have been parked for over 4 hours. This is the reality. Saying 2-hour parking is not enforceable because tires cannot be chalked is incorrect. When the chief of police says 2-hour parking is not enforceable, is it because it was discovered that there have been other specific parking ordinances covering the 2-hour parking limit in Lowell? I have to ask, why has there never been an official parking ordinance covering this when the city has had signage stating just that along Main Street for years? Perhaps something has been discovered and it needs to be corrected to make sure 2-hour parking is reinstated and, importantly, enforceable. If there was never an ordinance in the first place, I ask, why was it then necessary to adopt parking ordinance 23-02 with modification to officially eliminate the exact issue? If it is true that the city has the legal authority to regulate parking with signage without specific ordinance, then why was the existing 2-hour parking signage declared unenforceable? Why are all the 2-hour parking limit signs along Main Street in front of our small businesses that rely on the turnover of the available parking for their customers removed within a few days after the city council meeting on February 6th? I would also ask, why were the 2-hour parking signs along Main Street removed, but not the 6 2-hour parking limit signs in the lot that services City Hall and the police department? Is 2-hour parking without a specific 2-hour parking ordinance enforceable or not? For that matter, I have to ask if the parking limitation signs along Main Street are enforceable if there is not a specific parking ordinance for each situation. Are they all also now unenforceable? On Friday, 2 vehicles were parked in front of Main Street Barbecue where it was clearly marked no parking anytime. Multiple complaints were called in over a 3-hour period. City of Lowell police vehicles were seen driving by the vehicle several times, but it appeared no action was taken. Was this because there was also no parking ordinance for these signs? Does Lowell have a greater problem with enforcement of its parking signage? That is a much bigger issue than stating that 2-hour parking is unenforceable. When the chief of police states that 2-hour parking is not enforceable, is it because of manpower issues? I have already described enforcement has happened and it's conditional on an officer being available. but it has happened and the tickets have been issued. Many municipalities have part-time parking enforcement officers. Lowell does not. The city has budgeted for a code enforcement officer, which was approved by the position, but the position has not been filled. Can a code enforcement officer include parking enforcement? Where would the money come from for a parking enforcement officer? The general fund? I have to ask why the city council would approve nearly $50,000 for a police vehicle from the general funds when that type of expense could be submitted to the Lowell Community Fund, leaving budgeted money in the general fund. I ask if there is no manpower to enforce 2-hour parking limit along Main Street, then where does the city of Lowell expect to get manpower to enforce the parking restrictions in 23-02? If the city council wants to require certain vehicles to apply for parking, stickers, and permits, but not charge any fee, they give up a source of revenue that would help for the parking enforcement. What has been done to address this? It appears evident that there is concern among the small business owners about the removal of the 2-hour parking along Main Street in Lowell. Can the 2-hour parking be reinstated immediately and the signs replaced? If not, what does the city council plan to do?
Here.
Perry Beecham, reside at 924 Riverside Drive. Had two things tonight. First, when it comes to the parking, I think the city needs some kind of enforcement, because I've seen when I've done work on Main Street at different locations, I've seen employees of other companies or of other businesses on Main Street not park in front of theirs, but go down a little bit and park in front of somebody else's and have those cars sitting there all day long. I've seen at the corner here at Monroe, when in the summer when people are having a yard sale, a garage sale, they'll actually park a vehicle and put some signs in the vehicle showing, trying to get customers to come up to their garage sale. And I don't think that's what the parking is meant for on Main Street. Again, I don't know all the answers. I just think that there should have some kind of enforcement and not have it have no restrictions at all. So that's all I want to say about that. The second is a public announcement. Laugh Fest will be coming to Lowell. It will be held March 10th out at the Congregational Church in Lowell. They're working through right now to have a beer and wine license for that event. Hopefully this, and I know that the state has gotten that. Tickets you can go online, but tickets are sold locally at the Flat River Gallery here, and I would encourage everybody, the funds that are raised, Laugh Fest is a Gilda's event, and we have Gilda's here in Lowell that every Tuesday, and I would encourage everybody to take advantage of this. The comedian that they have is playing at, is also performing at Gun Lake, which is a pretty big venue. So I have a feeling that, his it will be family friendly, and would encourage everybody to go down and pick up a ticket and support Gilda's Club here in Lowell. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
Eric Barkus, I reside at 215 and a half West Main. I'd like to comment on the parking. This is a little bit of what I mentioned in my email. I was at the last council meeting where this was discussed, and I understand the willingness to not want people that are dining and shopping to feel rushed. You don't want to have to worry about your clock and that. So I understand the rationale of that thinking. But I also understand Karen Wade's position and others like Sweet Seasons that need easy, quick access to parking. And also Karen Wade's business needs short-term loading zones for her furniture. So at a minimum, I would ask that you would at least consider some areas that are short-term loading zones or shorter parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Susie, you don't have any more?
No, I don't.
Jessica?
Yeah.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. So I just want to clarify a few statements that were made. There are a lot of different issues being mixed together in this parking discussion. So just to set a few things straight, the one in particular that I care to address is the statement that was made that the ordinance or the restrictions never legally existed. That's not accurate. So the city of Lowell does have a parking ordinance, and they have adopted the Michigan Vehicle Code, Uniform Traffic Code and the Michigan Vehicle Code by reference. This allows them to regulate parking through signage, just like they had been all these years, limited to 2 hours. So in fact, that specific limitation doesn't have to be within the ordinance itself, if that makes sense. They have the discretion to do that via signage. So as you witnessed at the end of one of the recent meetings, the decision was made to change that. As it turns out, there was nothing in the ordinance that needed to be changed because, again, there's this blanket reference under the Uniform Traffic Code that allows them to do it via signage. So this council can make these decisions and do that via signage pursuant to discussions and votes up here. So just to reiterate, the way they were doing it before was legal. The way they're doing it now is legal, and this is just a policy decision. So just to be clear. Any questions about that? Let me know.
Now we'll skip to the due diligence of the Moose property.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Nicole Mason from BLDI is here tonight. She's going to go over the due diligence care report that was recently completed for the Moose Street property. We met all of our, I believe we met all of our requirements with Eagle pertaining to this, but she's going to walk you through it.
Hi. Yes, so my name is Nicole Mason. I'm with DLDI Environmental Engineering out of Grand Rapids. And we spoke earlier in the year about this property. It's the soil piles from the road in the Lowell property, and we did our follow-up investigation, and so I'm just here to report on that and what we found and all that kind of stuff. Perfect. So just as a reminder of what it is that I'm even talking about, in June last year, BLDI went out and collected a couple soil samples. We collected a lot of soil samples, but we collected a few from these various dirt mounds that were on this vacant property. And we did that because they're not native soil piles. And anytime you see non-native soil piles, it's a little red flaggy because you don't know where they're from and why are they there and all this stuff. So these turn out to be from street sweeping activities from the city in like the 90s. So they're probably fine, but they could have random automotive, like oils that drip off onto the car, all that kind of stuff. So we tested them anyway to make sure everything's fine. What are we seeing? So we did 21 soil borings in just the soil piles. We didn't test any of the native soils because none of that was a concern, to see what we find. So we go to the next slide, please. So what we found were, we found arsenic, chromium, and mercury in the soil piles at concentrations above residential criteria. And then if you look at non-residential criteria, it was just arsenic and chromium. So we kind of tested them for everything. Kind of like threw everything at it to see what are we going to find. And of everything, we just found those three, which is great, but there's still those three things we got to deal with now. As a reminder, these are all just from within the non-native soil piles, which I know I've already said about 3 times, but it's a very important point just to remember. Go to the next slide, please. So before I get too far into the due care stuff, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about today, it's important to talk about the different criteria. So you have 2 general types of criteria. You have residential and non-residential. And then from there, the state even splits it up even more. And that's because due care focuses on exposures. So you have all these chemicals, and how are you getting exposed to it? And generally, you have 3 ways to get exposed to a chemical, right? You can touch it, you can eat it, or you can breathe it in, right? And so they divide up all the different hazardous substances into those different kinds of categories. And there's different levels of, it's not acceptable, but levels of contamination you can have that it's different for each type of exposure, right? So if you have X amount of a chemical in drinking water, well, you can have a lot less of that before it makes you sick than you can just touching it, right? So different exposure pathways, you need different levels of exposure before something has an adverse effect. So there's a lot of different types, and that's what we evaluate when we look at data that we get back from a lab. We say, okay, what do we exceed? What are the relevant exposures here? And what do I actually need to look at and potentially address? So because this property is used for non-residential purposes, and it's planned to continue to be used for non-residential purposes, we focus on non-residential criteria. It's the first bucket. The second thing is focusing on, okay, well, what kinds of criteria did our samples actually exceed, right? We've got all these different options. So out of all of those, what do we actually have hits in the soil above? Okay, so that was a lot, but that's where we're at right now. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the 2 types of criteria that we exceeded for those soil samples we took from those non-native soil piles were drinking water criteria and groundwater surface water interface, which is GSI, which I'll explain in a second. The drinking water criteria isn't really applicable because there's no wells on the property. So no one is getting exposed through the drinking water pathway because no one is drinking the water at this property. So the concern here would be that there is soils with contamination in them at a high enough concentration that it could be leaching into the groundwater and then impacting a drinking water well. That's not the case in the area of the property. There are no wells, and there's no wells at our property. If a well was ever installed at the property, the due care plan that we wrote says you need to evaluate that further. You would need to test the well, you would need to do some more testing to make sure that everything there is safe before anyone actually drinks anything from that kind of well or uses it for irrigation or anything like that. So then the second one is groundwater surface water interface. This is how likely is it that there's soil groundwater impact here that could infiltrate or migrate to a surface body of water. And this property adjoins the Grand River, so that's a definite possibility. So based on the data we had, we couldn't answer that question. I don't know if these soil piles are posing a risk to the Grand River or not, so we had to look into it a little bit more. So go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just explaining that. The state has a bunch of information on it because it's kind of a funky pathway. It doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense like the other ones do. Drinking water exposure, I understand that. Direct contact, don't touch it, I understand that. This one's a little bit weird, so there is more information if you care to look that up. But basically it's, is there a hydraulic connection between the groundwater at the property and the surface water, and could we have contamination here that's impacting the surface water? That's our question. Next slide, please. So in October, we did another sampling event. We did 3 borings. We did 2, you can see there's the yellow dots there on that map. We did 2 right by the soil or the river bank. That's what that arrow was pointing to. It's not very far off the river bank. It's kind of as close as I could get that truck backed up before he was anxious about it, so that's where we went. We tested the soil. We only collected groundwater, so I'm not really worried about soil. The overall concern is there contamination that's got into the groundwater, and that groundwater is going into the river? That's my question. So I don't really care about soil at this point. What I want to know is the groundwater. Is the groundwater even a problem at all? So from those 2 right by the river, and then we did one a little bit further north, a little bit closer to the soil piles, which It's not very close, right? The soil piles are way up there at the top. But what are we looking at here? We ran all of those groundwater samples for arsenic, chromium, and mercury. Even though mercury didn't exceed the non-residential criteria, which is what we're focused on, it did exceed residential, and while we were at it, we figured we might as well run it, see what we see. Next slide, please. So we had no hits of anything. Everything was below reporting limits. We ran all 3 samples for arsenic, chromium, and mercury, and everything was below all the different kinds of criteria. These are all the different kinds of criteria the state has for groundwater, right? It's slightly different than it is for soil, but regardless, those are all the different types of criteria that you could have that you could possibly exceed. We didn't have anything above method detection limits in the lab, so the lab didn't pick anything up, which is great news. Next slide, please. So our concern was potential for impact to go into the Grand River, and based on the information we have, there's no evidence of that. It looks like the soil piles have not infiltrated the groundwater to the point where it's impacting even the local groundwater on the site, let alone at a high enough concentration to be a risk to the Grand River. Looks great, which is wonderful. That means there's no response activities necessary. Everything looks good here. So, next slide, please. So for the due care plan, it's not called a due care plan anymore. That is an old habit of mine. I apologize. It is a documentation of due care compliance report, DDCC. Due care plan is easier, but I have been reminded that's what it is. So we wrote all this up in a due care plan for the state, or for the city, and we turned it in to you guys. And so you have this for your records. And it goes over all the different exposure pathways. It says these were our concerns, this is what we investigated, and these are our conclusions. And there are other issues that you inherently could think about, right? Well, a soil pile, should I put up fencing? Do I need to put up signage? Do I need to worry about particles blowing around in the wind? That kind of stuff. All that is addressed in the due care plan, the DDCC, but also, in short, no. No, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can always put up signage, you can always put up fencing. That's always great if you feel the need to do so, but you do not have to. Those have specific types of criteria from the state as well, particularly if the wind blows and then particulates blow around, should I be concerned about that? There's its own special criteria for that, called the particulate to indoor air and ambient air inhalation. We don't come anywhere near to any of that. We had no criteria that was anything of a problem with that. This is one of the soil piles that we collected a sample from. Apparently it was HA17, okay? A lot of them look like that. A lot of tree growth, a lot of vegetation, so there's not even really an ability for wind to move those soils at all. You'd have to really want it to get dirt to come out of there. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you lived across the street and your kid went across and played in the dirt, you wouldn't worry about it?
I wouldn't be too worried about it. I do have one who, when he was a baby, he was a big dirt eater, right? Yeah. And I wouldn't love it. It wouldn't be my favorite thing that he's ever done. I wouldn't be super alarmed about it, but I would advise him not to, right?
Are you asking so you don't eat the dirt?
Yeah, that is also there's an ingestion criteria for exactly that reason for small children who lick the ground, right? And again, we don't exceed any of that criteria either. They have criteria for that. We looked at it.
So do we run the risk, if we went and decided we wanted to remove the mounds,
Mm-hmm.
don't we run a greater risk of actually contaminating the property at that point in time because we then have removed it?
Depends on what you do with them. So this is your environmental information sheet. This is my last slide, good timing. This tells you this is a form. It's in the DDCC. And if you have any contractors that work on the site, especially if they're doing anything subsurface, this is what you give to them to say, alert, there is contaminated soil here. It's in this area. This is what it's contaminated with. Don't play in the dirt and then not wash your hands and eat your lunch, right? This is what it says in here. You can, at any time, remove all those soils. But because they are known to have documented to have impact in them, you can't just dig them up and put them somewhere else. This would be part of the problem, why we ended up here in the first place. You can take them to a type 2 landfill. They'll take them. You could spread them out on your property, but then you would have to put a fence up and signage, because then it would have a particulate kind of issue, because you've removed the vegetative barrier in a lot of them. You'd be mixing up a bunch of stuff. You wouldn't quite know where it is. Your best bet would be to just remove it, if that's what you're going to go with. And if you remove it, you have to dispose of it at a type 2 landfill.
But there is no need to remove it, correct?
No need to remove it. Just leave it as is right now. But if you're going to do something there, you're going to need to remove them. You can't just like go out there with a backhoe and just move them around.
You had your hand up?
Yeah, I do have a question. So you said that it possibly did get into some of the groundwater, that's why you would want to well from in there?
No, we didn't know if it had or not. And this is for non-residential use, and so if the use changes and they were going to put a well in, there's no reason that they can't do so based on what we have here. We didn't see anything in the water, but they would have to do a new DDCC and get a bunch of testing done to make sure, because there's no soil contamination there, even though it's not the native soils. The native soils, we didn't test. We looked at the soil piles, right?
And follow-on question too, groundwater can get a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah.
Any chance that that would be reaching into an aquifer? Because an aquifer is not static, right?
Right, and not, again, not that we saw, right? If it was a big enough problem to be impacting the aquifer, we would have picked it up in the samples we saw. And we didn't even see anything to anything,
So
right?
did you do like a water test on somebody half a mile away or 40 miles away?
No, we just focused on the property. So you could do an extensive survey if you wanted to. There, at this point, with all the data we have, there was no need to do so. There were no risks.
I just wanted to.
Yep, there were no risks that we found to off-site properties. There were no risks that we found to the groundwater. And then the sampling that we did confirmed that, so we should be in good shape. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That was my last slide. So I'm all set.
Any other questions? Anything else, Mike? Nope. All right. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
You're up. Legislative update.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. Jeannie Johnson, your new state representative. You hired me. So I work for you. I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you for serving as well. And I will be here as much as I can, or one of my two staffers. You will see me have 4 coffee hours a month. It's 4 counties we're covering, so I'll try to be everywhere I can, but I'm going to be easily accessible. Myself, my personal cell phone is available to anybody who needs it. And you might think I'm crazy, but I think that's how we get some things done and streamlined the right way. I have staff to help with all of that, so we'll be hard at work. And office hours are in Lansing, but you don't have to drive all the way to Lansing. We have Lake Odessa, an office that I fund myself, not your tax dollars. And that'll be every Monday, 2 to 6 p.m. in Lake Odessa, right on Main Street, which is 6th Avenue. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have concerns or anything you'd like addressed at this moment.
I have an item. So, something you're going to probably be hearing from the Michigan Municipal League very shortly. This was before you were in the legislature. They approved $750 million for pension for communities that were underfunded pension-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And the predicament that was, the issue is that $750 million is going to communities that are below 60%. And with PA 202, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there is no requirement for them to actually make corrective actions with their pensions. The city of Lowell was at that point 3 years ago. We were at 60%. We got triggered by the state of Michigan. We filed our corrective action plan. We eliminated defined benefit for new hires. We bridged down our benefits for all of our employees. We've been paying ahead. We've been making additional payments to the unfunded liability annually. We've probably put over $300,000-$400,000 in the last 3 years just in excess funds. We've re-amortized our 30-year requirement to be paid in full to a point where it just helps us if we have an economic downturn. But the problem now is that many of the communities that are like in the 60 to 70%, they're not eligible for those funds. We've done the things that we're supposed to be doing, but you have communities, I won't name them, but we know who they are. They're not, they're going to be getting funding. There's going to be no requirement for them to correct whatever it is that needs to be corrected.
Right.
And so you will be hearing from the league very soon about this, because there's a lot of city managers who are very upset by this. And I know you didn't do it, but just something that.
But things.
Right. It's
But
an
I
issue.
hear you on this because it's not fair.
Right.
It's not fair. And across the board with even grants for help with sewage, wastewater treatment plants, clean water, infrastructure, who gets usually those grants? The same communities.
Yeah.
And those that struggle even have a bond, a millage, a way of you cut back so that you can be responsible. You don't get the rewards of doing that. I am all about, I hear you, I hear your heart, and I've already started a conversation about this, which is why I kind of know at least somewhat what you're talking about. I agree with you, and it's not right. And our smaller communities, especially smaller communities, not the bigger cities, get ignored.
Yeah.
You're responsible, you handle your money well, you do the very best you can, you're not poor enough
Right.
to have enough attention, and it's just not equitable. I agree.
I think the city took it serious enough to know that we had to
Yeah.
move forward to help us. And now to say we did what we thought was right and was being asked,
Yeah.
we did it, now we get nothing.
Punished for
And
being
it was
proactive.
right.
Yeah.
It was right, but I want to see a different kind of a grant program or some kind of program rewarding those who are already taking steps in the right direction, especially when we have a surplus. When we don't, we can't have this conversation,
Yeah.
but we can right now, which is very unusual.
Awesome.
Anything else?
Any other questions? No. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
We appreciate the
Thank you.
time.
Look forward to meeting with you one-on-one too. Thanks, Nick.
All right, time for a little fun. We're going to open the public hearing on 990 North Washington. If you want to provide public comment, hang on, Liz. I got you. If you want to provide public comment, you'll be limited to 5 minutes. I'll try to give you a warning at 4. And we're going to do names and addresses to Susie before, then we'll just call you right down the list. So if you're going to do public comment on the 990 North Washington property, give your name and address to Susie. If you'd like to volunteer, whether you're a city or township or other resident, that would be helpful as well.
One thing real quick, Mayor.
Yeah.
This is the map I was directed to provide. The area in green is Scout Park. The area in green, the dark.
And
It's green. It's actually green.
It's green.
It just doesn't look.
We believe you.
Um,
Forest green.
The area in red is the 990 North Washington property, or on state map, or on Regis maps, it's 848. I never understood why that is. The area, and that is city-owned property in Virgins Township. And then the area in purple, that is 846 North Washington. That property is owned in the city, is in the city limits. It's owned by the city. It's actually zoned at this point residential, but whatever you do with 990, I would suggest you carry over to that property as well.
Okay. Addresses and names to Susie, and then once we have a list, we'll get started here.
I think you have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Where does the North Country Trail fall within this map? Is it in the green section or does it enter into the red?
I couldn't tell yet. I don't oversee it. I wasn't asked.
It actually cuts through the lower part of that 990 property. If you drive down there, you'll see there's signage there, and it's a wiggly trail that heads up and goes back in. So, yeah, currently, to access it, you're accessing it from the 990 property on the, I guess it'd be the south side.
Anybody else? All right, then we will officially open the public hearing on future use of the 990 and, what did you call it, purple? Blue.
That's 846.
And blue property.
Who's purple of me?
Well, you called that other one, right? So, yeah. All right, Susie, who's first?
Periwinkle. I believe it's periwinkle.
I like that one, the periwinkle public hearing.
After you, Barry.
We have,
Perry here.
we have Bruce Matthews, 326 Riverside.
All right, now you can come on. Yeah.
Sure. I've got remarks on it. That's right. That's right. Bruce Matthews, 326 Riverside. I can't get past periwinkle. Anyway, the disposition and the future of the city-owned property referred to as 990 and 846, the red and blue or periwinkle on the map. That's been a hot topic for the city council for nearly a year, perhaps longer. This property is completely surrounded, as is evident on the map, by the popular Lowell's Scout Park. And clearly any use of this property, the property in question, 990 and 846, is that's inconsistent with the park's unique natural values, would have a negative effect on the Scout Park and its users, including the Scouts who've been there for over 50 years. Even a cursory glance at this map bears witness to the truth of this. We've now reached the point where the City Council will soon be deciding the fate of this nearly 4 acres of key park frontage and in-held city property, which encompasses acreage on both sides of North Washington Street. We believe the responsible and responsive action is the annexation of this property and its designation as part of Scout Park, for the following reasons. Number one, it honors